In a tense and unexpected moment, Hillary Clinton shocked the audience when she allegedly ordered security to remove Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré from the room. But what happened next left everyone stunned. Instead of backing down, Traoré's bold and unexpected move completely flipped the situation, drawing gasps, emotional reactions, and a wave of respect from millions online. This video uncovers the dramatic clash, the powerful response, and the unforgettable twist that has everyone talking. The UN General Assembly Hall was packed. World leaders, journalists, and diplomats filled every seat, the air buzzing with anticipation. But the moment the moderator called President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso to the podium, a sudden hush fell over the room. His presence was unusual. Young, sharp-eyed, and calm in a place where most leaders were decades older. Cameras zoomed in, microphones ready. As he adjusted the microphone, the audience leaned forward. Then, like a sudden clap of thunder, Hillary Clinton, seated in the front row, raised her hand. Her voice cut through the silence. "This man does not belong here. Security! Remove him!" Gasps echoed. No one moved. The cameras kept rolling. Clinton, 77, her face stern and unflinching, repeated her order, gesturing toward the guards at the side doors. All eyes darted back to Traoré. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, he placed both hands firmly on the podium. A moment of raw tension gripped the hall, the kind of tension that makes your chest tighten and your breath catch. Everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen, and no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what Traoré would say next. Security guards shifted uneasily but hesitated. No one wanted to be the first to act. Then Traoré leaned closer to the microphone, his deep voice steady yet sharp enough to slice through the air. "We remove tyrants," he said slowly, his eyes fixed on Clinton. "Not leaders fighting for sovereignty. You left chaos in Libya, and now you call me unfit." The words struck like lightning. The room gasped. A few diplomats lowered their heads. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. Clinton stiffened in her seat, her lips pursed but silent. Traoré wasn't finished. "You speak of democracy, yet your hands shaped wars that left millions homeless. I stand here not for myself, but for my people who refuse to kneel." The silence that followed was crushing. For a second, even the clicking of cameras stopped. Then came a sound no one expected. A ripple of applause, cautious at first, then louder, swelling across the hall. Delegates from Africa, Asia, and Latin America stood on their feet, clapping in defiance of Clinton's command. In that moment, the young president transformed from a target into a symbol. Clinton's authority, once absolute, seemed to crumble in real time. Clinton turned, signaling again to security. Her lips moved, but the thunder of applause drowned out her words. The guards froze, unsure whether to obey or stand down. Traoré straightened his jacket, his gaze never leaving hers. Then, in an act of pure defiance, he stepped away from the podium. The applause grew louder, echoing like a drum beat across the chamber. Traoré raised his hand in a small salute, not to Clinton, but to the crowd, to the nations that had stood and clapped. He walked down the steps with unhurried dignity, each step measured, unshaken. Cameras followed him like shadows, capturing every second. Outside the chamber, reporters sprinted to send headlines. Within minutes, NAR Traoré claps back exploded online. Videos of the confrontation went viral, streamed across continents. For many watching live, tears welled in their eyes, not from pity, but from pride. Pride that someone so young, so firm, dared to speak what others were too afraid to say. By the time Traoré stepped into his black sedan, waiting outside, millions around the world were already sharing his words, replaying them again and again. A leader had just walked off stage, but his voice would echo louder than ever before. By the time Traoré stepped outside the UN hall, Phones were already buzzing. Journalists scrambled to get his words online, while live broadcasts replayed the clip of him standing tall against Hillary Clinton. Within minutes, social media platforms erupted. On Twitter, hashtags like Chuck Traoré claps back and Voice for Africa climbed to the top trends. Some shared clips of Clinton's face, as his words landed frozen in visible discomfort. Others posted split-screen videos comparing Libya's ruins to Burkina Faso's resilience. Inside the UN building, conversations shifted sharply. Delegates whispered in hallways, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling quietly as though justice had finally spoken aloud. A diplomat from South America was overheard saying, "This was history. Everyone will remember the day a young African president looked America in the eye and said enough." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, ordinary Burkinabe crowded around radios and phones, many with tears streaming down their faces. Mothers whispered prayers. Youths recorded reaction videos. Elders nodded with pride. Traoré's defiance wasn't just political. It was deeply personal for a people who had endured exploitation for too long. The spark he lit in that hall was already spreading like wildfire across continents. Back inside the chamber, Hillary Clinton sat stiff, her jaw clenched. For a woman who had spent decades commanding rooms, this was a new and bitter taste. Silence heavy with judgment and applause that didn't belong to her. A few close allies avoided her eyes. Others leaned in, but found no words to comfort her. Cameras zoomed in, capturing her tightened expression, broadcasting it across the globe. For years, Clinton had been viewed as untouchable in diplomatic circles. Yet here, in a single moment, her authority cracked. Not under an American rival, but under a 37-year-old African president whose name many had just learned. Commentators rushed onto news panels. CNN replayed the confrontation. One analyst saying, "This wasn't just politics. It was a moral reckoning in front of the world." Fox News called it the most embarrassing moment of Clinton's career. A laser framed it as a new voice for the global South. Clinton, however, said nothing. She sat scribbling notes, her face unreadable, but the silence screamed louder than words. She knew what was happening outside, a narrative she couldn't control, a wave she couldn't stop, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't the center of power. By nightfall, the clip had been shared over 100 million times. From Paris to Lagos, from São Paulo to Johannesburg. The moment replayed in living rooms, cafes, and classrooms. Talk shows dissected every second. Students at African universities held watch parties, cheering and chanting Traoré's name as if he had scored a last-minute goal in a World Cup final. In the United States, the reaction was divided. Some criticized him harshly, accusing him of disrespect. But a surprising number of Americans admired his courage. A veteran in Detroit tweeted, "I don't agree with him on everything, but I respect a man who can speak truth to power without fear." That tweet alone gathered 500,000 likes. At the Bay Embassy in New York, supporters gathered with flags, singing traditional songs, tears streaming as they waved at passing cars. They didn't see Traoré himself. He was meeting quietly with his advisors, but they didn't need to. His words had already reached them in a way no speech ever had before. In just a few hours, what had started as an attempted humiliation had transformed into one of the most powerful viral moments of the decade. And it was only day one. In Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, nightfall didn't bring silence. Crowds poured into the streets, waving flags and chanting Traoré's name. From tiny roadside tea shops to crowded university dorms, televisions replayed the confrontation on loop. Young men pounded drums, women ululated, and elders sat with quiet tears streaming down their faces. One mother holding her child close whispered, "For years we have watched our leaders bow their heads. Tonight our son stood tall for us all. Her words spread as quickly as the video itself, captured by a journalist who filmed her story. Across Africa, similar gatherings erupted. Students in Ghana danced and cheered, while in Nigeria, hashtags praising Traoré overtook football discussions for the first time in months. Even in villages with weak signals, people crowded around single radios or shared phones, desperate to hear every word of what had happened. But the celebration was not without fear. Rumors swirled that powerful figures might attempt to silence Traoré or punish him politically. Still, the people's voices were louder than the whispers of fear. The young president had lit something inside them, something that felt impossible to put out. The next morning, journalists from every corner of the world crowded into a small hotel ballroom in New York, waiting for Traoré to speak. Cameras clicked nonstop, the hum of whispers filling the air. Some expected him to apologize. Others thought he would downplay the incident. Instead, he walked in calm, dressed in his simple military-style suit, his eyes sharp yet warm. Taking the podium, he paused until the room was completely silent. "What I said yesterday was not against one person," he began, his voice deep and steady. "It was for my people and for every nation that has been told to stay silent while others write our story. We are not children. We are sovereign." The hall erupted with flashes and typing. His words felt less like a statement and more like a declaration of dignity. Reporters from African outlets wiped away tears as they filmed, while even some Western journalists nodded slowly, visibly moved. By the time he ended saying, "If defending my people makes me unwelcome, then I will proudly remain unwelcome," the entire hall broke into applause. Outside, the crowd waiting on the streets cheered as if victory had just been declared. Meanwhile, across Washington and New York, Clinton faced a storm she hadn't anticipated. News anchors dissected her decision to call for Traoré's removal, asking why a former Secretary of State would target a sitting head of state in such a public way. Editorials ran with brutal headlines. "Clinton misstep sparks global outrage." When power meets defiance, a new voice shakes the old guard. Critics accused her of arrogance, of underestimating the power of symbolism in a digital age. Even longtime allies in her own political circle distanced themselves quietly. On social media, the backlash intensified. Memes mocked her reaction, while others contrasted her silence with Traoré's strength. The most viral clip showed her pointing at security, before cutting to cheering Africans celebrating in the streets. But perhaps most damaging was the emotional tide. Commentators said her call to remove him looked like an attempt to silence not just a man, but a continent's voice. For millions who had long felt invisible, it was proof of the double standards they had always endured. Clinton's decades of political dominance now stood overshadowed by a single clash, one that shifted the balance of moral authority before the entire world. Back in Ouagadougou, President Traoré's mother sat in her modest living room, watching the confrontation replayed on a small television. She wasn't a woman of politics, but she knew the weight of her son's words. Tears rolled down her cheeks as neighbors gathered around, some kneeling, others clapping in admiration. One elder spoke softly. "Your son carries not just the Burkina flag, but the spirit of Africa itself." His words drew nods and murmurs of agreement. Phones buzzed endlessly with calls from across the region. Mali, Niger, Guinea, leaders who had faced their own storms called to congratulate him, each saying the same thing. "You spoke for us all." But in the background of the celebration, there was unease. Some advisors whispered to Traoré about potential diplomatic retaliation, sanctions, or attempts to isolate Burkina Faso. Yet for every threat, there seemed to be 10 times the amount of love and solidarity pouring in from the people. That night, Traoré's mother prayed quietly, asking God to protect her son. She knew the world had just placed a heavy burden on his shoulders, But she also knew he would not falter. The next morning, reporters walked through the bustling streets of Dar, Lagos, and Nairobi, collecting reactions from ordinary people. Their microphones caught words that were raw, emotional, and unfiltered. A taxi driver in Lagos shook his head, saying, "We have waited too long for a leader to say this." It felt like he was speaking for every African who has been told we are less. In Dar, a group of university students gathered with painted signs. "We stand with Traoré." They live-streamed their chants, reaching tens of thousands online in hours. Some students admitted they had cried the night before. It wasn't sadness, one young woman explained through tears. It was pride. Pride that finally someone refused to bow. Even in Harlem, New York, African immigrants filled a small cafe, replaying the clip again and again. One elderly man whispered, "When he said those words to Hillary, I saw Thomas Sanka's spirit alive again." His voice cracked, and others around him nodded, wiping their eyes. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was memory, identity, and dignity wrapped into one viral moment that the people themselves had turned into history. In diplomatic circles, the fallout was immediate. Ambassadors rushed into late-night meetings trying to draft responses. Some nations openly sided with Traoré, calling him a courageous voice of truth. Others stayed silent, afraid to be caught in the storm. At the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, leaders convened an emergency session. For years, many of them had chosen quiet diplomacy. But Traoré's moment made silence feel like betrayal. One representative said firmly, "If a young man can risk everything in front of the world, we can no longer hide behind empty speeches." The room erupted in applause. Meanwhile, in Washington, analysts warned that Clinton's miscalculation might have long-term effects on U.S.-Africa relations. On television, commentators debated whether this single clash had redrawn the lines of respect. But beyond all the noise, the most striking image came from a viral photo. Traoré walking calmly out of the UN hall, while dozens of delegates clapped behind him. The photo was shared millions of times, with one caption repeated in every language: "Dignity cannot be silenced." The earth beneath international politics had shifted, and the tremors were still being felt. In a small classroom in Burkina Faso, children gathered around a projector as their teacher replayed the clip of Traoré's words at the UN. These were boys and girls barely 10 years old, yet their eyes shone with pride. One little boy raised his hand and said softly, "That's our president. He spoke for us." The teacher moved to tears, paused the video, and explained, "Leaders are not meant to kneel before the powerful. Leaders protect their people no matter the cost." The children clapped, some even standing to imitate Traoré's posture at the podium. That same clip of children cheering began circulating online. It struck viewers harder than any political analysis. Parents across Africa shared it with captions like, "This is what dignity looks like to our children." In Ouagadougou, when Traoré himself saw the video later that night, he fell silent. He wasn't just speaking to presidents and diplomats anymore. He was speaking to a generation that would carry his words long after the applause had faded. And that realization weighed on him more deeply than any headline ever could. While the public celebrated, behind closed doors, tensions grew. In Washington, top advisors debated whether to respond officially to Traoré's words. Some pushed for silence, warning that any attack might fuel his popularity. Others wanted to issue a strong condemnation, fearful of losing control over the narrative. At the UN headquarters, whispers spread of a potential diplomatic standoff. A few delegates confided privately that Clinton's move had been reckless. Yet, no one dared say it too loudly. The old guard wanted to protect her legacy, but the younger voices, particularly from Africa and Latin America, argued it was time for honesty. Traoré, meanwhile, met quietly with his advisors. Some urged caution. Others encouraged him to seize the moment and give another speech before leaving New York. But Traoré shook his head. "This is not about me," he said firmly. "It is about my people and about truth. Truth needs no echo. It carries itself." His restraint only deepened respect worldwide. For many, it proved he wasn't chasing fame. He was defending dignity. That subtle choice marked him not as a loud disruptor, but as a leader with discipline, humility, and strength. 2 days after the clash, an international journalist secured an exclusive interview with Traoré. Cameras rolled as he sat calmly, his hands folded on the table. When asked why he chose to respond so directly to Clinton, his voice softened. "Because silence would have been betrayal," he said. Then came the moment that broke millions. The journalist asked if he feared for his safety after such defiance. Traoré looked down, took a deep breath, and replied, "If my life is the cost of truth, then let it be. But at least my children and the children of Africa will know their father stood even when the world wanted him to kneel." The interviewer froze, tears welled in her eyes, and so did those of viewers across the globe. That clip spread like wildfire, more powerful than hashtags or speeches. It was no longer just about politics. It was about sacrifice, about courage that cut into the soul. In living rooms, people wept. Online, comments poured in. "This man is different. He speaks like a father, not just a president." The story had shifted from a clash of power to something far deeper. A story of heart, honor, and humanity. On the 5th day after the clash, a handwritten letter reached Traoré's hotel in New York. It came from a group of Burkina students studying abroad. They had pulled money together just to deliver it. The letter read, "President, we saw you stand tall when others wanted you silent. You didn't just speak for Burkina Faso. You spoke for us, the youth of Africa who dream of a future free from chains. Please don't stop. You gave us courage." Traoré held the letter in his hands longer than anything else that week. He read it quietly, then placed it on the table in front of his team. His eyes glistened, but he said nothing. The silence in the room was heavy, filled with respect. Outside the hotel, young people gathered with banners and flags, chanting his name. Their voices drifted up to his window, raw and unpolished, but strong. In that moment, he understood this was no longer about a confrontation with Hillary Clinton. It had become about hope, a mirror reflecting the hunger of millions who wanted dignity restored. On the 6th day, Traoré stood before the press one last time before leaving New York. The hall was smaller than the UN chamber, but every seat was filled. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters leaned forward, ready to capture his final words. He began softly, "What happened here this week is bigger than me. I am a man. I will pass one day. But dignity belongs to the people, and no one can take it away." Then his voice grew firmer, shaking with emotion. "Do not remember me for defiance. Remember me for love. Love of my people, of Africa, of justice. If a man cannot defend his children's future, then what is the worth of his power?" Tears rolled down cheeks in the audience. Some reporters lowered their cameras, overwhelmed. Others nodded, visibly fighting to hold back their emotions. As he ended, Traoré pressed his hand over his heart and said, "To every young boy and girl watching, never bow to lies. Stand even if your legs shake. The world belongs to those who stand." The hall erupted into thunderous applause. On the final day of his stay, a photograph went viral. It showed Traoré walking through JFK Airport with no entourage, just a simple suitcase in hand. Around him, African immigrants rushed forward, hugging him, some crying uncontrollably. He hugged them back, smiling softly as though they were his own family. That image told the world something no speech could. He was not distant, not unreachable. He was there as a lure,